Top 36 Worst Affected Coronavirus Jobs. How important is your job in the eyes of the government? Now, the government would say all jobs are important, but the interpretation of the way in which we went into lockdown and came out of it would suggest otherwise. This is my list of every job I can think of and where they rank in terms of job security, health and safety, and the practicality of working with them with coronavirus. Starting with the jobs I think the government most prioritises, but who also had to deal most with coronavirus, and ending with the sectors unaffected by the virus itself, but more likely to become unemployed. Number 1. Intensive care and A&E for coronavirus. It's pretty obvious why this is both the most affected by coronavirus, with an estimated 181 NHS workers who have died from coronavirus, but also, as a result, the sector least likely to face cutbacks and unemployment. There's also a lot of guilt to make up from the government's perspective for the lack of PPE provided to its healthcare workers, not to mention the clapping we all did every Thursday. Number 2. Food and pharmaceutical retail. From the start of this crisis, people were panic buying toilet roll. This led to the government into prioritising everybody's food supply, especially as deliveries were fully booked, and going to the shops seemed ludicrous for the shielding people were doing. Shops posed a problem in a way that they were places people needed to go to, but also tended to be crammed full of people. Nonetheless, with social distancing in place, it seemed unlikely we'll be losing our supermarkets anytime soon. Number 3. Scientific research. From testing people, to finding the R rate, finding the treatment of dexamethasone, and eventually finding a vaccine. The government has always said they're following the science. Now granted, they didn't have enough testing capacity at the start of this crisis, but that's more down to manufacturing than research. The science arguably could have been wrong at the start of this crisis in our timing of the lockdown, but nonetheless, there's no chance the government won't continue to plough money into scientific research. Number 4. Government. The government has been tested throughout this crisis, losing the capability of Parliament, having special advisors breaking the rules, and even temporarily losing our Prime Minister. It's obvious that managing COVID-19 was the priority, and therefore the managers, i.e. the government, were unlikely to disappear. But things like the furlough scheme, a scheme to stop unemployment and keep the government on side politically, have come at a huge cost economically. Add to that frustrations born from protest movements like Black Lives Matter and our overall death count, and the government is certainly weaker as a result of this pandemic. Number 5. Media. At the surprise to some, journalists were considered key workers. They were trying to report the news, but have also managed to stir up a lot of fear and hate over the past few months. It seems likely that the inquiry into coronavirus will examine and hopefully reform the way in which the media responds to such events. But then again, they got away with the phone hacking scandal, largely unscathed. Number 6. Policing and other emergency services. It was eventually made law for people flouting the lockdown rules to be fined, but many arguments arose about whether the police was too strict on people at the start of this crisis. Then towards the end, as protests started to emerge, little was done to stop those protests. It would also seem likely policing will face a review, the same as the media. Number 7. Defence. The army has been setting up testing facilities and delivering PPE throughout the UK. Unlike a war, unusually, they have come out of this crisis largely unscathed, but defence budgets could take a hit in the future. Number 8. Deliveries. The delivery and trade sector has been essential throughout this crisis. The question is whether our new habits of shopping have changed for good, or whether the government will try and get this sector to prop up the high street. Number 9. Essential public transport. Unfortunately, not everyone drives, and that means public transport employees, especially across London, have contracted the virus. Public transport won't be going away anytime soon, but it's clear that as a result of this pandemic, people may be put off travelling for good. Number 10. Services. Essential plumbing, gas and electricity have been working throughout this crisis. The problem is our consumption-based economy relies on people spending their money. Unfortunately, people don't have that money to spend, so it may be our service-based economy changes in the coming years. Number 11, construction. Weirdly, construction carried on even during the lockdown, but many construction sites still shut down anyway. You can't logistically work as a team while maintaining social distancing in a physical environment, and yet the government sort of turned a blind eye to it. That's because projects like HS2 remained a priority, and it's all about levelling up the country. Number 12, exercise. Unlike Spain, the UK was allowed one form of exercise per day during lockdown. Some pushed their luck, however, and ended up sunbathing only to be dispersed by the police. But individual exercise has proved to be a business for people like Joe Wicks and might prove to be a new sector benefiting from the virus. Number 13, care homes. As priorities go, it's safe to say care homes were an afterthought for the government. The transfer of patients with coronavirus symptoms from the NHS to care homes and the lack of PPE led to the deaths of 131 care workers and 8,312 care home deaths. As a result, people are now reluctant to put relatives in care homes, and the care sector looks more under pressure from both the economic impact of coronavirus as well as the health impact. Number 14, other emergency healthcare. Because of COVID-19, many people with underlying heart conditions, strokes and breathing difficulties, among other things, chose to delay their visit to A&E. This meant their conditions got a lot worse than they otherwise would have done. As a result of this, the UK has many unexplained excess deaths. Number 15, manufacturing. Manufacturing became a priority when it seemed like the UK wasn't going to get enough ventilators or PPE. As a result, every manufacturer who felt they could was given the task of developing and making these items. In the end, ventilators turned out not to be an issue, but nonetheless, car factories were among the first places to open once lockdown was eased. Number 16, first year and later year education. The proposed opening of schools was met with a lot of fear from the teaching unions over the safety of staff. Students, key workers and vulnerable students were the priority during lockdown, but now lockdown could be eased, schools were tasked with letting those in the early years and later years back in. With the shortfall in education, it seems as though schools will be working extra hours to get students caught up and not have too many students in at one time. But schools have yet to go fully back, which is expected in September. Number 17, non-essential healthcare. Once lockdown could be eased, non-essential healthcare could also take priority, from cancer treatment to eventual dental care, but who knows what the long-term impact of this break in the treatment capability has been. Number 18, parks and beauty spots. When the lockdown started to ease, the government was keen to get us using our beauty spots again, the only problem being the masses of people that use them. Will Britain turn into a more medieval style country now as a result, where people only remain in their local towns and villages? Who knows? But tourism at home will also be encouraged to boost the economy. Number 19, social lives. The government was keen to help everyone's mental health as soon as possible. As soon as they could, they encouraged people to have socially distanced barbecues, but they did it, albeit as cautiously as possible. Number 20, office work. Working from home clearly worked well with office work in mind, so it was clear it was more of a priority for the government than any other form of work. It's also a lot easier for a sitting office worker to socially distance than any other place of work. Number 21, religion. Religious worship is hard to do without festivals like Eid or Easter, but attending funerals was a priority the government wanted to eventually give exception from the rules to let people attend. Unfortunately, with COVID-19 still around, the funeral industry won't be disappearing anytime soon, at the possible cost of Christmas as we used to know it. Number 22, outdoor retail. Car showrooms were one of the first to open post-lockdown, along with the housing sector. The only problem is, people might still be reluctant to buy expensive items like cars and houses. Number 23, public transport more generally. Now that businesses were opening, public transport was given the safety net of enforced face masks. Number 24, zoos and theme parks. With schools not fully open, it seemed odd that a child could visit a zoo. On the other hand, zoos offer educational opportunity as well as an opportunity to support the welfare of animals. Number 25, outdoor sports. Again, it seemed even odder that the government would allow 22 men in close proximity in a goal line in a football stadium. However, the Premier League does help boost the economy and people's spirits, even without fans in seats. Some would say, however, that there are more important things to life. 26. Indoor retail. Indoor retail will suffer most from coronavirus because of the social distancing measures put in place, which mean the retail store doesn't allow trying on clothes anymore or even walking freely, which is not really that different from the online retail store. It's likely people will prefer to shop online than queue. Number 27. Restaurants and hotels. Restaurants are likely to open with outdoor dining available, and the same goes for hotels with social distancing in place. Smaller indoor restaurants, however, may suffer forever, closing their doors. 28. Bars and pubs. Larger pubs like Wetherspoons have already announced plans for opening, including perspex screens between tables and sachets of ketchup. But smaller bars will fail to make a profit with the 2-metre social distancing rule in place. Number 29. Hairdressers and nail parlours. Close proximity places like hairdressers will need to find a way of keeping safe while offering the service. It seems unlikely they will be allowed to open anytime soon. Number 30. Air travel. Air travel can now happen, however, anyone coming into the UK has to face a 14-day quarantine. This, along with other countries' lockdown measurements, puts people off travelling abroad, which will probably mean a huge hit to the travel sector. Number 31. Cinemas. With social distancing, it's been suggested that cinemas can make more of a profit than theatres, for example, but even still, keeping venues sterile while going to a packed blockbuster screening proves difficult and is likely to serve the multiplex cinemas more than the independent venues. Number 32. Stadiums. Because stadiums are outdoors, it's been suggested that these could open first. However, keeping an atmosphere in a socially distanced concert and still making a profit seems unlikely. Number 33. Gyms and indoor sports. Televised indoor sport is likely to make a comeback with the gym industry. The question is, will people want to exercise inside anymore if they have discovered alternate forms of exercise? Number 34. Theatres. Unlike cinemas, theatres need a high capacity to make a profit big enough to pay all the performers and crew involved. This makes it impossible to open with social distancing in place, putting the theatre industry under greater risk. Number 35. Nightclubs. Nightclubs tend to be small and densely packed places. Again, this makes opening up and maintaining a profit difficult with social distancing in place. And number 36. Cruise ships. Making a profit means filling the ship, and as we know, cruise ships are notorious for spreading diseases anyway. Cruise ships suffer from the worst of all worlds, being high capacity venues and within the travel sector. So what do you work as, and how safe do you feel going to work and keeping your join in the debate below and subscribe.